But now we get on to the business of actually launching our report. And it gives me a great pleasure to acknowledge the Honourable Bill Shorten, Leader of the Opposition, who will launch our report today, but also to acknowledge your leadership in terms of, along with Tanya, in terms of driving the national conversation about Gonski and needs-based funding, and for the commitment that the Labor Party has made to the $4.5 billion package to deliver Gonski needs-based funding for years 5 and 6. So welcome, Bill. Thank you.
I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge today my colleague Tanya Plibersek, my shadow spokesperson Kate Ellis, who's not here but works so hard on this policy, and of course the state shadow opposition spokesperson as well, Jamal Dib. But the person who I most want to acknowledge, or the people I most want to acknowledge, are the teachers of Australia. They're the people who... I want to put an end to the education wars once and for all. We will fight this as an education election. We will put the funding on the table to make sure that every teacher in Australia gets the recognition and the support to back up what they do every day. The job of teachers is bitterly underappreciated in the national political debate and in elements of the media. Teachers carry so much of communities' expectations. You are the people to whom the parents trust our children to leave when they first have their days at school. Teachers have to always not only be engaged intellectually, engaged with physical effort, the teachers of Australia have to engage emotionally. We entrust the teachers of Australia with the most precious commodity in our country, that is our children. Teaching should receive more respect in the public discourse, and this is what motivates me fundamentally. I'm the son of a teacher. I know how hard it is, and I watch the work the teachers do with my children. And I want the best education for my kids, so why on earth wouldn't we want the best education for everyone's children? And let me also say this. If any of my children grow up and want to be teachers, I'd encourage them to join the union as well, because you've stood up. But this is a most exciting election. We've got the Prime Minister, whose biggest decision this weekend will be which day he calls the election. But today, I submit that one of the biggest issues, there is no issue any more important, is the future of education. This is an education election. And the choices couldn't be starker. On one hand, we heard this week the Prime Minister say that the best 10-year plan for this country is to give tax cuts to $1 billion companies. I say, by contrast, properly funding our schools on the basis of need, that is the proper priority for the next 10 years for this country. We could have, on one hand, reasonably properly paid teachers, well-resourced in the schools, or you can choose to give a tax cut to people who earn $1 million. We can have a choice, on one hand, to have the right to a great education, or you can have the right to negatively gear your 10th property. We can have a choice what sort of country we want to present to our children, what sort of country we seek to describe ourselves by. Budgets are choices. This budget under this government says it is more important to spend over $10 billion a year of taxpayer subsidy on negative gearing than it is to, and they spend a smaller amount on school education for government schools. That is not the country I believe we want to present to our children. I believe in a country where we present the priorities of its adults to our children, being we properly fund our schools. That is a first order issue, not some arcane debate about changing capital gains tax and defending that. Education. Now that is a nation building strategy. Education is an economic strategy. It is an innovation strategy. You cannot be an innovation nation, as the Prime Minister claims to want to be, unless you are an education nation. On Thursday night, I couldn't have been any prouder when I was able to advise Australians in my budget reply speech that a Labor government, if elected on July the 2nd, will implement the Gonski funding regime and provide it over 10 years. Gonski plus certainty for longer, and we go beyond. That is our promise to the election, and we will fight the election proudly on the basis of a better future for every child, in every school, in every postcode in Australia, and we seek your support to do it. I want to thank Liliana and Sarah for their presentations and their speeches. I wish that every voter could hear the heartfelt sincerity, the sense of purpose, and what you are doing for the kids who we trust you with, and the marvellous results you're accomplishing with Gonski funding. This report is a testament to the value of properly funding needs-based education in this country. And I thank you both for your presentations today. This report shows that properly funding our schools isn't about business as usual. It isn't about doing more of the same. This report speaks to the hope. It speaks to the hope that with additional funding, children who need with special learning needs will get the resources they need. Greater individual attention for our children in the classroom. Greater resources so that children, as they make their journey through education, can have a greater chance to fall in love with a passion or an area of interest which will then sustain them the rest of their marvellous life. This is a chance in this election to properly fund our schools so that we can have a world-class education system. I started my presentation to you this morning talking about the role and the perhaps lack of value that teaching has received in political discourse over 30 to 40 years. Back in the 1950s and 60s, becoming a teacher was not only an important vocation, it was a way out of the working class. It was a way in which teachers were respected in our community and valued. Somewhere along the line, that debate and some of the powerful decision makers have in some fashion sidelined being a teacher. Of course, what we now want to do is, by committing to needs-based education, we make that deeper statement about the importance of education in our society. What do the children and students think when we spend so much money on our shopping malls or our plasma TV screens? What message do we send to them about what is important in our lives? Should be important in their lives? I am fundamentally committed, as my whole team are, to properly funding education, because we will send a message, if we are elected government, that the education of our young people is what is most important to the adults of Australia. Our kids are brave and optimistic. They should expect the same qualities from the political leaders in whom we place our trust, and we will keep that trust, I promise you that. When we have the debate about education in this election, we see the Liberals bemoan the cost of Gonski. Why is it that the funding of our schools is viewed by the Conservatives as a cost. Let's redefine that language. It's an investment in every Australian's future. It is an investment. Now, these days, 5 minutes to midnight, in the shadows of an election, the government has said, well, after taking $30 billion out and bemoaning and ridiculing, they've put back perhaps $1 billion. And they hope that by having taken out bucketfuls and replaced it with cupfuls, that all will be forgiven, that the sheer munificence, the magnificence that is Malcolm Turnbull will be enough to compensate for underfunding our schools. It's not. It is not. Mr Turnbull thinks that because he went to school with David Gonski, that is enough. We will deliver David Gonski's funding system. It's as simple as this, really, isn't it? You can't be a smarter nation when you cut the funding to our schools. It's really as simple as this. When you hear some people say, oh, more money doesn't fix things, the only people who have that view are people who already have enough money.
That's right, yeah.
They talk, and we and everyone say that this election will be about trust. Well, in 56 days, people will walk through the gates of their local schools to vote. And what they will be doing in these schools is they will be voting on the future of those schools. And we absolutely agree that this election is about trust. Who do you trust to properly fund our schools? Is it a Prime Minister who, a month ago, in declaring the most fabulous reforms in the history of federation, gave an opinion that in an ideal world, the Commonwealth that he would lead would get out of the business of funding government schools? How can you trust someone who doesn't understand that the taxpayers of Australia who pay their taxes to Canberra have a legitimate expectation, a reasonable and well-founded belief that the taxes they pay, that some of them come back in the form of improved funding to the schools to which they send their children? This is the issue. Who do you trust to properly fund education in this country? And I promise you, if we are successful on July the 2nd, we will implement the full Gonski funding and go beyond certainty. If we win this election, we will end once and for all the education war about needs-based funding in this country. We have an opportunity the generations of teachers before, the generations of parents before haven't had. Let us grasp this opportunity to have needs-based funding as the basis for funding of education of our kids in Australia. Let's win it on July the 2nd, and let's make education an issue where needs-based funding is what every parent and every child and every school will receive. Thank you very much.